The Edge Chronicles, Beyond the Deepwoods, by Paul Stewart and Chris Riddle, read by P. Waitonick. Chapter 2. The Hoverworm. The sounds of the deep woods echoed loudly all round as Twig walked along the path through the trees. He shivered, tightened his scarf, and pulled up the collar of his leather jacket. He hadn't wanted to leave that evening at all. It was dark and cold, but Spelda had been insistent. "There's no time like the present," she said several times as she got together the bits and pieces that Twig would need for his journey. A leather bottle, a rope, a small bag of food, and, most precious treasure of all, his naming knife. Twig had finally come of age. "Anyway, you know what they say," she added, as she reached up and tied 2 wooden charms around her son's neck. "Depart by night, arrive by day." Twig knew Spelda had been putting on a brave face. "But be careful," she insisted. "It's dark out there, and I know what you're like. Forever dreaming and dawdling and wandering, that's all around the next corner." "Yes, Mother," said Twig. "And don't yes mother me," said Spelda. "This is important. Remember, stick to the path if you want to steer clear of the fearsome Gloamglazer. We wood trolls always stick to the path." "But I'm not a wood troll," mumbled Twig, tears stinging his eyes. "You're my little boy," said Spelda, hugging him tightly. "Stick to the path. Wood trolls know best. Now be off with you, and give my lug to Cousin Snetterbark. You'll be back before you know it. Everything will be back to normal. You'll see—" Spelda couldn't finish. The tears were coming thick and fast. Twig turned and set off down the shadowy path into the gloom. Normal, he thought. Normal? I don't want things to be normal. Normal is chalk bladder games. Normal is felling trees. Normal is always being left out, never belonging, and why you should be any different at Cousin Snetterbark's. Being press-gained into crewing a sky ship suddenly seemed more appealing than ever. The sky pirates roamed the skies above the deep woods. Surely their airborne adventures must be better than anything down here on the forest floor. A desperate howl of pain echoed through the trees. For a second, the deep woods were still. The second the night sounds returned, louder than before, as if each and every creature was rejoicing that it was not one who had fallen prey to some hungry predator. As he walked on, Twig began putting names to the creatures he could hear out there in the treacherous deep woods away from the path. It helped to calm his pondering heart. There were squealing quorms and coughing frumps in the trees above his head. Neither of them could harm a wood troll, at least not fatally. Away to his right, he heard the chattering screech of a razor flit about to dive. The next instant, the air was filled with the scream of its victim. A wood rat, perhaps. Or a leaf globber. Some way further on, with the dark path still stretching out in front of him, the forest opened up. Twig stopped and stared at the silver moonlight that snaked along the trunks and branches, and gleamed on the waxy leaves. This was the first time he had been out in the forest after dark, and it was beautiful. More beautiful than he had ever imagined. With his eyes gazing up at the silvery leaves, Twig took a step forward away from the shadowy path. The moonlight bathed him in its cold glow and made his skin shine like metal. His billowing breath gleamed, snow-bright. "Incredible," said Twig, and took a couple of steps more. Below his feet, the glittering frost crackled and crunched. Icicles hung down from a weeping willow, and the beads of liquid on a dewdrop tree had frosted and frozen, and glistened now like pearls. A wispy sapling with fronds like hair swayed in the icy breeze. "Amazing," said Twig as he wandered on. now left, now right, now round a corner, now over a slope. It was also mysterious, also new. He stopped by a bank of quivering plants with tall spiky leaves and budded stems, all glinting in the moonlight. All at once, the buds began to pop open, one by one, until the bank was covered with massive round flowers, with its petals like shavings of ice, that turned their heads to the moon and glowed with its brilliance. Twig smiled to himself and turned away. "Just a weeny bit further," he said. A tumblebush tumbled past him and disappeared into the shadows. Moonbells and tinkleberries jingled and jangled in the gathering wind. Then Twig heard another noise. He spun around. A small, sleek, furry brown creature with a corkscrew tail scurried across the forest floor, squeaking with terror. The screech of the wood owl sliced through the air. Twig's heart began to race. He looked around him, wildly. There were eyes in the shadows, yellow eyes, green eyes, red eyes, all of them staring at him. "Oh no," he moaned. "What have I done?" Twig knew what he had done. "Never stray from the path," Spelda had said. Yet, that was precisely what he had done. Entranced by the silvery beauty of the deep woods, he had strayed from the safety of the path. Twig groaned. "I can't do anything right! Stupid, stupid, stupid!" he shouted at himself, as he stumbled this way and that way, desperately trying to find his way back to the path. All at once he heard something, a sound which silenced his voice and froze him to the spot. It was the wheezing pant of a halitoad, a huge and dangerous reptile, with breath so foul it could stun its victim at 20 paces. At 10 paces, the stench was lethal. A single evil-smelling belch had been enough to kill Hottergruff's uncle. What could he do? Where could he go? Twig had never been away from the Deepwoods path on his own before. He started this way, stopped, ran the other way, and stopped again. The sound of the wheezing halitoad seemed to be all round him. He darted into the shadows of some dark undergrowth and crouched down behind the trunk of a tall and lumpy tree. The halitoad came closer. Its rasping breath grew louder. Twig's palms were wet, and his mouth was dry. He couldn't swallow. The fromps and the qualms fell silent, and in the awful stillness, Twig's heart beat like a drum. Surely the halitoad must be able to hear it. Perhaps it had gone. Twig peered cautiously around the trunk of the tree. "Mistake!" his brain screamed, as he found himself staring into two yellow, slit eyes glinting back at him from the darkness. A long coiled tongue flickered in and out, tasting the air. Suddenly, the halitoad inflated like a bullfrog. It was about to blast its jet of venomous breath. Twig closed his eyes, held his nose, and clamped his mouth shut. He heard a frizzing hiss. The next moment, there was a muffled thud from behind him as something fell to the ground. Twig nervously opened one eye and inspected. A frump was lying on the forest ground. Its furry prehensile tail was twitching. Twig remained perfectly still, and the halitoad shot out its sticky tongue, grasped the hapless frump, and scuffled off with it into the undergrowth. "That was close," Twig said, and sighed with relief. He wiped the sweat from his brow. Too close! The moon had turned milky, and the shadows had deepened. As Twig wandered miserably on, the gloom clung to him like a damp blanket. The halitoad might be gone, but that was the least of his worries. The fact remained that he had strayed from the path. Now, he was lost. Often Twig stumbled, sometimes he fell. His hair became wet with sweat, though his bones were chilled to the marrow. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know where he had been. He hoped he wasn't simply going in circles. He was also tired, yet each time he paused to rest, a growl, or a snarl, or a ferocious roar would set him trotting off again.